What does it mean to be good? It seems like a simple question, doesn't it? Concepts of right and wrong conduct are ingrained in our minds since we're children. It's a testament to our ability as humans to evolve past the need for the cruel judgment of natural selection. And allows us the ability to finally set individual goals and find personal morals and standards of living on our own. There is no book that you can read that will adequately explain how to react in a moral dilemma. No document that can tell you how you should act when presented with a bribe, or if you are forced to steal. There is no text that can properly define situations where it's ethically acceptable to take a life to save another, or even the moral implications of cannibalizing someone else to save your own.
Oh. Bon appetit.
Bon appetit.
Morality existed long before we developed the ability to write or even speak, but this truth is undermined by the common assumption that morality was inspired by some divine text. In the words of Mark Twain, we get our morality from books. I didn't get mine from books, but I know that morals do come from books. Theoretically, at least. The complexity of moral actions and values are done no justice by Scripture because the ultimate implications of every moral action cannot easily be limited by a simple set of commands. It's not like morality is objective. Oh right, I forgot. The moral argument. Well, a good place to start is to ask, what are morals? What can be the standard to define morality? And what is the driving force behind making people want to be good? Well, in answer to the first question, it can be argued that morals are a system that we as humans use to determine right and wrong thoughts and actions. Many theists believe that this system of values is directly dictated by God. The assumption is that morals are objectively true and thought to be unchangeable and independent of human intervention. Well, this brings up some obvious problems, and lo and behold, they happen to be outlined beautifully in one of my favorite arguments, the Euthyphro dilemma. If you're unfamiliar, it goes as follows. 1. Is that which is good commanded by God because it is good? Or 2. Is it good because God commands it? You see, if God commanded something because it is good, then goodness somehow existed outside of God's dictation. This implies that goodness was already there. God was just the messenger, and he is appealing to a higher standard. If morality is subject to God's commands, it becomes arbitrary. God could say that murder is okay, and it would be morally good just because he said so. The real question is what makes his commands correct. Is it because this entity supposedly created everything? Because he's all-powerful? Taken in different terms, would you ever grant a governmental authority the same power over your will? The United States government has the power to create and destroy nations. Should they have similar authority to assume the position of a moral standard in the population? Well, of course not. It's ridiculous to assume that just because a being possesses greater power, that they also are correct or even good. This is a fallacy of might makes right. I've been confronted in some instances by theists who tell me that morals and values are dictated by God based solely on his divine innate nature. You see, God exists by the necessity of his own nature, non-contingent of anything else. They say that morality is not created at all, but rather is founded on God. In essence, it is co-eternal with him. So to be moral is to act in accordance with God's nature. Well, that doesn't really answer anything though, now does it? It just puts the Euthyphro dilemma into different terms, more interesting ones at that. Does God have control over his nature? Or does he not have control over his nature? You can replace God's nature with really any other factor and you will arise at the same conclusion, such as honesty, morality, kindness, goodness, etc. If God's nature is that of kindness, for example, is kindness right, or is it right just because it happens to be God's nature? Well, kindness couldn't just be right because, again, that would assume that kindness already existed, and something outside of God chose this to be one of his eternal properties. Of course, the other option is equally as dubious. Your theist may exclaim that kindness is essentially part of God's nature. They may exclaim that there is no outside force that could make God's nature to be different than it is. It doesn't happen to be, it just is by necessity. Well, my theist friend, it's fine that you think that kindness is a requirement of God's immutable nature. But what does it mean to be kind? What standard are you using to determine kindness? If you say that kindness is better than cruelty, then I would have to ask, why? Why is kindness morally better than cruelty? Because kindness reflects God's mutable nature? Okay, well, why is God's mutable nature one of kindness rather than that of cruelty? Well, because kindness is morally better than cruelty. And why is it again that kindness is morally better than cruelty? You see, this is circular logic. Saying kindness is better than cruelty says nothing about kindness or God's nature or cruelty for that matter. It just says that kindness is God. You need some sort of standard. How did you come to the conclusion that good is better than evil, that kindness is better than cruelty? Every time you assert that God's nature is X, you render X meaningless, because you're simply giving alternate properties to pre-existing things. The theist could try to insist on some sort of moral hierarchy to weasel their way around this dilemma. You could conclude that all moral actions can be weighed based on God's divine nature as a standard, and that they can be applied by ordering moral actions or judgments accordingly. For example, lying and murder are both morally wrong, but if you must tell a lie to save the life of another person, that lie would be morally conducive to God's nature of holding lives sacred. But again, there is no way around the Euthyphro dilemma. When employing a moral hierarchy with the premise of a divinely given objective morality, you always fail in one of two ways. One, having a moral hierarchy automatically puts moral decisions into the hands of people because determining one moral action is superior to another takes subjective thinking. This makes morals subject to these people's interpretations rather than objectively true. Or two, the problem of definition. When there is no tangible standard for morality, there's no way to define what is moral. You can say that people are able to recognize objective morality because God's innate nature is morality, and He endowed us with this ability, but that still does nothing to define your terms. It's like saying that people are able to recognize honesty because my 1995 Pontiac Sunfire's innate nature is honesty, and my Pontiac endowed us with the ability to recognize this honesty. So, obviously, to be honest, is to act in accordance with my 1995 Pontiac Sunfire. This is when you may be told, well, how can you justify your morality? Naturalism cannot tell us what we ought to do, it can only tell us what is. Atheists have no basis for their morals just because science and naturalism are unable to say anything about morality. It's non-overlapping magisteria. Well, obviously I disagree, and that brings me to my second question. What can be the standard to define morality? We can come to naturalistic conclusions about morality just fine. Science and naturalism deal with the natural world, and ideas about honesty and kindness are perfectly natural subjects. Instead of implying that the only way to be moral is to act in accordance with God's nature, you can conclude rationally and naturalistically that moral actions fall under two easily identifiable categories. To be morally good is to increase health and well-being or to reduce pain and suffering, and to be morally bad is to reduce health and well-being or increase pain and suffering. Of course, you may disagree with this description, but these are real concepts that people can agree on, and are in no way concluded by some divine revelation. By defining your terms, it becomes rather simple to judge moral behaviors. This methodology deals more with the root moral action or decision, instead of authoritatively stating that issues are either black or white, like stealing is wrong. It allows us for a more realistic area of gray. Instead of stealing is wrong, you ask, why is he stealing? If it turns out that he's stealing because he's hungry, then that theft may increase the health and well-being for that individual. This is where the idea of a moral hierarchy really shines, because instead of the standard being nebulous and untangible, we can put the standard into terms that the majority of society can agree with. Objective morality doesn't work because morals are contingent on minds. Ideas of right and wrong conduct only exist in concept, and equally those actions can only be performed by conscious beings. In a time when the universe existed with no conscious beings, there was no ability to produce moral oughts, and there would have been no reason to, because newly forming stars and planets really have no reason to be honest or kind. Realistically, morals and values cannot be unchangeable and independent of mind, because morality is by definition contingent on the thoughts and actions of conscious beings. Though minor concepts of morality may differ between cultures, the primary ideas of justice, kindness, honesty, etc. are still accepted, not because morality is objective, but because many of these concepts achieve the same purely naturalistic goals of promoting health and well-being or reducing pain and suffering. And this is the unwritten knowledge that is the true driving force that makes people want to be good. This video is not necessarily directed at, but deals with many of the arguments presented by a YouTuber I highly respect called Epidemic 2020. Though I do not agree with him on various issues, I find him to be very rational with his views and thought-provoking. If you're not subscribed to him, I highly recommend it.